My name is Sienna, 34 years old. Just a few days ago, I buried my husband across the ocean. After a nearly 30-hour flight, exhausted and clutching the suitcase filled with his last keepsakes, I texted the family group chat. The plane lands at 6 p.m., can someone pick me up? My brother replied curtly. Busy, call an Uber. My mother scolded. Why didn't you plan ahead? In that moment, standing in the crowded airport, I realized I was completely alone. And what I never expected was that only a few hours later, the whole city would see my tragedy on the evening news. Have you ever been in a situation where you needed your family the most but only received cold indifference? If you relate, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe so we can continue this journey together. Before everything collapsed, I used to think I was one of the luckiest people. I met Michael when I was 23, back when we were both stumbling our way into our careers. He was a civil engineer and I worked at a small advertising company in Seattle. That day we ran into each other at a coffee shop when Michael clumsily spilled his cappuccino all over the stack of documents I was carrying. He panicked, apologized, insisted on buying me a new set of documents, then awkwardly asked me to dinner as a way to make it up to me. I agreed, and from that dinner our story began. Michael was the kind of man who made me feel at peace. He didn't say fancy words, but the way he cared for me never left room for doubt. Every time we passed by unfinished buildings, he would point out details no outsider would notice. The thickness of a concrete pillar, how the steel was welded, or how blueprints were adjusted when faced with difficult terrain. His eyes lit up whenever he spoke about the projects he dreamed of building, and I would sit quietly, letting his passion wash over me. We got married after 3 years, in a simple wedding held in the small backyard of a friend's house. I remember clearly that day. Seattle skies suddenly opened with a light drizzle. Everyone scrambled for cover except Michael, who held my hand, smiled, and said, "Rain brings luck. One day you'll see. Today is the beginning of the best things to come." I believed him. And truly, the years that followed passed like a dream. We rented a small apartment downtown, then after years of saving began planning to buy our own house. Michael would joke, "The house has to have a big kitchen for you to cook and a backyard big enough for me to build a shed." I dreamed of a room full of light where I could set up a desk and some green plants. And of course, we both silently knew that one day, that room would become the nursery for the child we longed for. Many evenings we sat together on the balcony, sharing a cheap bottle of wine, talking about the future. Michael had a habit of sketching messy drawings on napkins, while I would dreamily add colors to them. "One day we'll have a kid running around the backyard, screaming loud enough for the neighbors to complain," he laughed, putting his pen down. I leaned into his shoulder and softly said, "I don't need a castle, just anywhere you are." 10 years of marriage passed like that, not glamorous but full of small joys. Michael worked hard and I rose from a marketing employee to department director. We never forgot to make time for each other. Thursday nights playing board games with friends, weekends walking along Alki Beach, or sometimes just sitting side by side reading in silence. And then everything changed. Last year, Michael received an offer from an international company, a major project in Ireland that would last 6 months. It was a rare chance for him to advance his career. When he brought the news home, I saw that sparkle in his eyes, the excitement I couldn't bear to extinguish. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice both eager and cautious. I held his hand, smiled. "I think I'll miss you so much. But I also think you have to go. This is your dream." We planned that I would spend a few months there working remotely, and we would experience life in a new place together. We even mapped out a few European cities to visit during holidays. Both of us believed 6 months would fly by and then we'd start a new chapter, building a home, having children. The night before his flight, I prepared a simple dinner at home. Candlelight flickered, soft music played, and Michael, in his familiar white shirt, looked at me with so much tenderness. 6 months, then I'll be back and we'll have everything," he promised, his hand tightening around mine. I nodded, pushing away the vague unease in my chest. I wanted to believe him. We kept our word. For the first 2 months we video called every day. I flew to Ireland for Christmas, stayed nearly 3 weeks. Those days felt like a second honeymoon. We wandered cobblestone streets, drank beer in small pubs, and he took me to visit his work site. I was so proud seeing how respected and well-liked he was by his colleagues. But happiness didn't last. It all fell apart too quickly. One morning in Seattle, as I was leaving for work, Michael complained of a headache during our video call. He said it was probably stress from deadlines. I told him to rest. 8 hours later, one of his colleagues called me frantic. Michael had collapsed during a meeting, rushed to the hospital. I booked the first flight, running through the airport with tears streaming. 26 hours later, I arrived at the hospital in Ireland. Michael lay motionless, machines beeping coldly. The doctor said he had suffered a brain hemorrhage. Emergency surgery had been done, but the damage was too severe. I held his hand for 5 days straight, whispering stories, begging for a miracle. But he never woke up. Michael died at 36. I handled everything alone. The paperwork was overwhelming, and the cost of transporting his body back to the US was too high. I had to bury him in Ireland, a foreign land, but at least some of his close colleagues came to say goodbye. On the day of the burial, I stood alone, feeling the whole world had turned its back. My family didn't show up. My mother said plane tickets were too expensive. My brother claimed he couldn't miss a business opportunity. I looked down at the damp soil where he was laid to rest, tears mixing with rain. Inside me rose that familiar bitterness. All my life, I had never been a priority in my family. On the day I married Michael, my parents arrived nearly an hour late. My mother spent the whole time fussing over my brother Kyle's new girlfriend instead of blessing me. When I walked down the aisle, I caught the disapproval in her eyes at my simple wedding dress. My father kept grumbling about the costs. I told myself, it's fine as long as Michael is here. But the wound never healed. Standing at Michael's grave in a foreign country, I realized maybe I never truly had a place to lean on in my own family. From here on, I would have to learn to keep walking, alone. I returned to Seattle after long days in Ireland, carrying the heavy suitcase full of Michael's keepsakes. Our house appeared before me, still the same familiar sight, but the moment I stepped onto the porch, a strange chill seeped in. Not from the weather. It was as if the walls themselves sensed his absence. When I opened the door, a musty smell rushed out, stinging my nose. I frowned. The wooden floor of the living room was icy and soaked. Streaks of water trailed from the hallway down to the kitchen. My heart sank as I heard the relentless dripping from above. I rushed to the basement. And then the sight before me froze me in place. The entire basement was flooded, water up to my ankles. The concrete walls were stained, the fuse box crackled. A large pipe overhead had burst from the freezing cold, spraying water wildly like an out-of-control fire hose. In an instant, I was utterly hopeless. Just yesterday, I had stood by Michael's grave, promising myself I would try to move forward. Yet on my very first day back, the home that was once our haven had turned into a battlefield. My hands trembling, I pulled out my phone and dialed Kyle. Kyle, my house is flooded. A pipe burst, water is everywhere. I don't know what to do. On the other end, loud music blared. Kyle spoke quickly, his tone impatient. I'm getting ready for a big client party. Can't help right now. Try calling a service or hiring someone. I'm busy. My throat tightened. Before I could respond, he hung up. The water kept rising. I called my mother. She picked up after several rings, sighing as if I had disturbed her. Mom, I got back from Ireland. My house has a burst pipe. It's completely flooded. I need help. Oh dear, today's not possible, Sienna. My prayer club is meeting at my house. Guests are about to arrive, I can't leave. Did you buy home insurance? They should cover it. I bit my lip hard. I need someone to come be with me. I can't manage this alone. She sighed and cut me off. I know you're sad, but you need to learn to plan better. Next time, prepare ahead. I dropped the call, my chest heavy as if pinned by a boulder. Still clinging to hope, I called my father. His voice came through. You should have bought insurance from the start. Everyone knows you have to prepare for these things. Now just call a plumber. I don't know what else to do. I burst into tears, but he stayed silent, then hung up. The empty house echoed with dripping water, each drop striking my heart. Gasping for breath, I knelt down, trying to scoop water into buckets, moving furniture away from the shimmering outlets. Exhausted after the long flight, my hands still shook as I dragged Michael's suitcases upstairs, terrified the last of his belongings would be swallowed by the water. The basement was freezing, water up to my ankles. I tried to find the main shutoff valve. Struggling with the phone's flashlight, my foot slipped on the wet floor. Instinctively, I grabbed the fuse box beside me. Instantly, a jolt of electricity tore through my arm, searing into my skull. I screamed, and then darkness closed in as my body collapsed into the icy water. The last thing I remembered were Michael's suitcases sitting on the stairs as if looking down at me. And in that moment I thought, maybe this was when I would finally follow him. When I woke, everything was blurred, harsh white light burning my eyes. The first sound I heard was the steady beeping of a heart monitor, mixed with the sharp smell of antiseptic. My throat was parched, my chest heavy as stone. I tried to move, but pain shot down my right arm, the same one struck by that brutal shock. A warm voice came, distant but clear. "She's awake. Easy now, don't try to move too fast." I blinked, adjusting my vision. A nurse with brown hair and a kind, round face was standing by my bed. Her name tag read, Sarah. Her name tag read, Sarah. Where am I? I whispered. Sarah leaned down, her voice gentle. "You're at Seattle General Hospital. You were brought in with hypothermia, carbon monoxide poisoning, and signs of electrical injury. Luckily, your neighbor called emergency services in time. If it had been even a few hours later." Her words trailed off, but I understood. My whole body shook, not from cold but from the thin line between life and death I had barely crossed. Sarah handed me a cup of warm water. I sipped slowly, tears spilling down my cheeks. Who called 911? I asked. A figure stepped forward from near the door. A tall, middle-aged woman with neatly cropped hair and worried eyes. "I'm Diane. I moved into the house across the street. I saw water pouring out from under your door and heard the alarm blaring. I knocked, but no one answered. I feared the worst, so I called 911. I stared at her, overwhelmed. A woman I hadn't even had the chance to greet since moving into the neighborhood had saved my life. I shook my head, my voice trembling. "If it weren't for you, I wouldn't." Diane quickly cut me off. "Don't say that. What matters is you're still here. Focus on healing." But my heart ached all the same. I had begged my own blood, my mother, father, brother, yet all turned away. In the end, a stranger was the one who reached out and pulled me back from death. A few days later, when I was more alert, Sarah handed me my charged phone. The screen lit up with dozens of notifications. Messages from the family group chat still glaring. "Call Uber. Why didn't you plan ahead? You should have bought insurance from the start." Cold, detached words cutting straight through me. But one notification chilled me even more. An alert from a local news site. The headline stretched across the screen. "Widowed woman abandoned, saved by neighbor after nearly dying in flooded home." Below was a blurry photo from the scene. Firefighters breaking down my door, carrying me out on a stretcher. Behind them, water spilling across the porch. The article detailed everything. I had buried my husband in Ireland, returned to a flooded home, abandoned by my family, saved only because a new neighbor noticed and called 911. I choked when I reached the last line. According to sources, the victim's phone contained family group chat messages where her pleas for help were bluntly refused right before the accident. Screenshots of those texts were plastered on the article itself. That afternoon, my hospital room overflowed with reporters. Questions fired at me. "Do you want to say anything about your family? How does it feel that the person who saved you was a stranger?" I shook my head, tears streaming. "All I can say is, I'm alive because of someone I barely knew. Sometimes compassion comes from where you least expect it." Diane, standing quietly behind me, placed a steady hand on my shoulder. 2 days later, the story exploded across newspapers and TV. Outrage spread everywhere over how my family treated me. Social media brimmed with comments. "Can't believe any parent would abandon their daughter like that. What kind of brother leaves his widowed sister to fend for herself?" The family was absent, but a neighbor who barely knew her saved her life. The irony is staggering. From my hospital bed, I read every word. Each line felt like both comfort and salt on my wounds. I had never wanted to become a headline. But the truth was out. And for the first time in my life, the public stood with me instead of turning away. That evening, the hospital door opened. Kyle walked in, his face pale, eyes evasive. Behind him came my mother, dressed neatly but with a tight, rigid face, and my father, silent as ever. Kyle spoke first, his voice rushed. Did you see the news? My whole company is buzzing. Clients keep calling. You have to say something. This is ruining the family's reputation." I looked at him, my lips trembling. "Reputation? What about my life, Kyle? He froze, his face flushing red, but said nothing. My mother cut in, her tone sharp. The media twisted the story. They picked the parts that fuel outrage. You need to make a statement correcting this or else. I turned away, tears spilling. In all their explanations, all I wanted was one question. Are you okay? But it never came. Only my father, the quiet man standing in the corner, finally stepped closer. His trembling hand rested on the bed rail as he whispered, Are you okay, Sienna? It was the question I had waited for all my life. But it came too late, too little to fill the void. I closed my eyes and let out a weary sigh. Outside the hospital window, Seattle's rain streaked down, mingling with the tears on my face. The next day, while I was still in the hospital, a social worker walked into my room carrying a folder. She introduced herself as Patricia, her eyes gentle but resolute. Miss Henderson, I'm here to discuss your plan after discharge. I know you've been through a lot, but I also want you to know the community here has rallied and wants to support you. I was stunned, unable to respond. Patricia opened the folder, showing me printed pages. A list of organizations, businesses, and individuals offering help. A local construction company had offered to repair my house for free. A downtown Seattle hotel was ready to sponsor 6 weeks of accommodation, including breakfast and laundry service. A grocery store pledged to provide essential food supplies while I recovered. And even a group of women who had lost their husbands in accidents sent me an invitation to join their weekly gatherings. My fingers trembling as they slid over each line of text. A woman who had spent her whole life waiting for her family's care was now being embraced by strangers. Patricia smiled. They want you to know you're not alone. 3 days later, I was discharged. Diane, the neighbor to save me, was waiting in the hospital lobby. She wore a thick coat, holding a bright bouquet of yellow tulips. Welcome back, Sienna. This is a new beginning. I clutched the flowers tightly, too choked up to speak. Patricia came along, helping me complete the check-in at the hotel the community had arranged. My room was on a high floor, the window looking out over the river. The room glowed with light, the bed dressed in crisp white sheets. When I stepped inside, a gift basket was already on the table. Fresh bread, milk, a few kinds of fruit, and a small handwritten card. Rest well. We believe you will overcome this. Your new neighbors. I held the card, my heart trembling as if gently squeezed. For years, I had grown used to the indifference, the criticism from my family. Yet within just a few days, people I had never known made me feel valued. The following week, Patricia took me to a widow's support group meeting. We sat in a cozy room at the local community center. Chairs were arranged in a circle, a pot of hot tea and a plate of cookies on the table in the middle. The meeting was led by Eleanor, a woman in her 60s with silver hair, bright eyes, and a calm voice. She introduced everyone, and when it came to me, my throat tightened. I'm Sienna. I lost my husband to a work accident in Ireland. I thought I was okay, but when I came back, everything collapsed. My house, my trust and family. Then a woman named Marjorie reached for my hand, her voice trembling. I understand. When my husband died in a car accident, my son was only 15. My family told me not to complain, that I needed to be stronger. But I knew that kind of pain couldn't be wrapped up in shallow advice. The tears I had always held back in front of my family poured freely in this circle of strangers. But no one judged, no one turned away. They listened, and the nods, the hand squeezes, the sympathetic eyes, all became medicine I had never received before. Eleanor spoke softly. We're not here to fix each other's pain. We're here to remind one another that we are not alone. And sometimes that's the only thing we need to keep going. In the days that followed, I began to form new habits. During the day, I visited the community center and talked with the group. In the afternoon, I sat by the hotel window, writing down memories of Michael. And at night, Diane often stopped by, sometimes bringing hot soup, sometimes simply walking a few laps with me around the block. One evening, as we sat on the stone bench in front of the hotel, Diane looked at me and said quietly, Sienna, I don't know much about you. But I see one thing: you survived. And the fact that you are still here, still breathing, still feeling, that's proof of a strength bigger than you realize. I turned to her, my eyes red. I've spent my whole life thinking I didn't matter. My parents always put Kyle first. When my husband died, I thought at least they would be there for me. No. Turns out, the ones who matter most now are you, and people I've never even met before. Diane held my hand gently. Blood doesn't always mean love. True family are those who choose to stay, especially when things get hard. Her words etched into my heart like a reminder. A few weeks later, the repair crew began work on my house. I went there myself, standing before the door that firefighters had once broken open. Inside lingered the smell of mold, cracks and stains covering the floors and walls. A thin, wiry worker bowed slightly and said, "Don't worry, Henderson. We'll turn this back into a home. All costs are already covered." I thought of Michael. If he were still alive, he would have fixed every corner himself. But now, unfamiliar hands were doing it for him, as if the whole community was carrying the responsibility my family had abandoned. The pain inside me was still raw, but in the middle of that darkness, a light had begun to flicker. I realized I was not completely alone. There were arms holding me up, even if they didn't share my bloodline. And for the first time since Michael was gone, I felt my heart loosen, allowing a fragile hope to slip in. A hope that from the ruins I might still find the warmth of a home. The day I left the hospital for the hotel, it seemed as if things were finally settling. I had learned to breathe deeply, to focus on healing. But a few days later, as the public chatter continued, my family suddenly appeared. That afternoon, I was sitting in the hotel room, watching the river shimmer through the window, when pounding knocks rattled the door. Slowly I opened it and Kyle stormed inside, his face flushed red, eyes burning with anger. My mother followed, clutching tissues, sobbing loudly. My father came last, his posture straight but his gaze heavy, carrying something he couldn't say. Kyle erupted first. "Do you even know what you're doing, Sienna? This story is everywhere. My coworkers, my clients, they all look at me differently. You're ruining my reputation." I stared at him, speechless, my lips trembling. Inside me, pain and fury mingled, but my voice came out soft, almost a breath. "Reputation? Where was your reputation when I nearly died in that flooded house?" His fists clenched, his eyes flickered, but he turned away, avoiding my question. My mother cut in, sniffling, "Sienna, you're shaming the whole family. The press exaggerated too much. You have to speak out and correct it. Don't you see? Everyone thinks we abandoned you. That's not true. Do you really want your parents to spend the rest of their lives under the neighbors' whispers?" I remembered all the times she overlooked milestones in my life to chase after Kyle. The times I needed praise, but she smiled at her son instead. Now her tears fell, but not for my suffering, only for the image she feared losing. I steadied my voice. "Mom, I never asked for the press. I don't want to be a headline. All I needed was someone by my side when I came back. Instead, I faced it all alone, until a stranger saved me." My father, silent from the start, finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud like Kyle's, nor rushed like my mother's. It was low, raspy, tinged with fatigue. "Sienna, I don't know what to say. But I saw it. When you were in the hospital, when they showed those messages, I understood. We were never truly there for you." For the first time in my life, I heard an admission from him. No excuses, no blaming circumstances. Kyle cut in defensively. "Don't say that, Dad. She's blowing this out of proportion. Every family gets busy. We can't drop everything for one issue." "One issue, you call it? Was my life and my happiness, Kyle. When I got married, Mom fussed over your girlfriend. When I graduated, they left early to take you to a baseball game. And when I lost my husband and nearly died alone, you called it one issue? To you, my life is worth nothing more than a shrug." My mother grabbed my hand, pleading, "Sweetheart, we're family. Family has to protect each other's image. We never hated you, it's just not the way you think." I stared at her, then at my father. He kept his mouth shut, his eyes heavy as if confessing without words. In that moment, I understood. Family wasn't hasty tears when reputation was at stake. It was presence in your darkest hours. And my family had not been present. Kyle stepped closer. "You need to post something. Say the media got it wrong. If you don't, I'll lose a big contract. You can't be this selfish." I lifted my head, my eyes raw but my voice steady. "Selfish, Kyle? I begged you once, just once, to come to me after I lost my husband. And you told me to call Uber. I told you my house was flooding and you brushed it off like nothing. If my survival wasn't important enough, then today, you have no right to ask me to save your reputation." Kyle's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, ready to argue, but no words came. I looked away so they wouldn't see the wetness in my eyes. Outside, the city lights glimmered, the river kept flowing. And I realized my father's silence, the silence he had carried for years, was perhaps the clearest answer of all. He knew, he saw, but he chose to stand aside. That morning, the room was heavy with silence. The heart monitor blinked red and green. I sat up, leaning against the pillow, my eyes on the door as Dr. Reynolds entered with the social worker. My mother, father, and Kyle were already seated, their faces tight as if preparing for a board meeting. The doctor began, calm but firm. Before we decide the next stage of care, I need to know what support the patient actually has. Patricia, the social worker, nodded gently, placing the folder on the small table. What matters most is that Sienna has a safe, warm place, with someone staying with her for at least 48 hours after discharge. She has endured severe physical and emotional trauma. Kyle cut in quickly, his voice stiff. She has family. We'll take care of her. I turned to look at him. Since when did he remember I belonged to family? I spoke. When Michael was dying in Ireland, who in the family was by my side? My mother lowered her head, lips pressed tight. I went on, my voice choked but firm. When I returned after a nearly 30-hour flight, who picked me up at the airport? Kyle blinked, then looked away. I gathered all my strength, my voice breaking but each word echoing in the silent room. When I nearly died in a flooded house, suffocating from toxic air, who called the paramedics? No one. I don't need false care now. I don't need hands reaching out only because the public is outraged. I need the truth. And the truth is, when I needed you most, my family wasn't there. Reynolds looked at me with understanding, while Patricia quietly wrote notes, her face pensive. My mother sobbed. You can't say that, Sienna. I prayed for you every day. You prayed, but you didn't come. When I clung to Michael's last breaths, you said the plane ticket was too expensive. When I landed at the airport, you told me to plan better. When I called for help, you refused because you were busy with your prayer club. Do you know it was a neighbor I hadn't even greeted yet who saved my life? Not you. My mother trembled, crying hard, but she had no rebuttal. Kyle slammed his hand on the table, his voice sharp. You're being selfish. Every family has limits. Do you think everything should revolve around you? I don't need everyone to revolve around me, Kyle. I needed one person in the family to show up. Just one. But no one chose to. He froze, lips quivering, unable to speak. After a long pause, my father finally spoke slowly. Sienna is right. All eyes turned to him. For too long, we've treated her as someone who could handle everything. We were too focused on Kyle, too worried about appearances, and we forgot this daughter also needed support. I have no excuse. I had waited my whole life to hear an admission, but it came too late, like ashes after a wildfire. Patricia spoke clearly. Sienna has the right to choose where she wants to stay and who will care for her. This isn't about hurting the family, but about ensuring she recovers safely. I don't hate anyone. But I can't pretend nothing happened. I can't go back to playing the good daughter, pretending I was loved, when in my darkest hours I was abandoned. Reynolds closed the file, looking straight at my mother. What the patient needs now is not empty promises, but real action. And if the family cannot provide it, she has other options. The community is ready to help. My mother lowered her head, her sobs fading. Kyle slumped into a chair, face burning red, unable to meet my eyes. My father kept his heavy gaze, like a man facing undeniable truth for the first time. I turned toward the window, watching pale sunlight slip through the blinds. I had spoken everything, holding nothing back. Between the rusty chains of family ties and another path, where I could choose who walked beside me. The day I was told I could leave the hospital, my mother rushed over, her voice urgent. You'll come home with us. We've prepared a room. No one can care for you better than family. Beside her, Kyle folded his arms, his glare still full of resentment. My father lingered in the back, wordless as ever. I drew a deep breath, then slowly shook my head. I'm not going back. I already have a place. My mother froze, eyes shimmering with grief. What are you saying? You're going to abandon your family? After everything, you'd let outsiders replace us. Blood doesn't equal love, Mom. Real family are the ones who show up when you need them. Kyle shot up, growling. You can't keep bringing that up. You're exaggerating, Sienna. No, Kyle. I'm only repeating the truth. Thanks to your indifference, I now see clearly where I stand in this family. My father let out a weary sigh but didn't object. Deep down, perhaps he knew every word I said was true. A few days later, I moved into a small room arranged by the community support group. It was a housing unit for women who needed shelter after crises. And in that room I found something I hadn't for years: warmth. On my first evening, just as I finished unpacking, Diane knocked. She carried a steaming pot of chicken soup. I thought you could use a proper meal. And maybe some company. I sat at the little table, the aroma of soup filling the room. I burst into tears as the first spoonful touched my lips. Diane sat quietly across from me, not prying, placing her hand gently on mine, giving it a squeeze. Thank you. Thank you for coming. No one has ever cared for me like this except Michael. Diane smiled warmly. You're not alone, Sienna. A week later, Patricia, the social worker, invited me to a meeting of a nonprofit that supports widows. When I stepped into the room full of seasoned faces, I felt I had entered another world. There was no judgment there, only listening and understanding. The facilitator was a gray-haired woman named Linda. She looked at me kindly, then asked, Sienna, would you like to share a little? I hesitated, then nodded. My husband, Michael, died in a work accident in Ireland. I handled everything alone. When I came back, I thought at least my family would be there. But they weren't. I nearly died in my flooded house, and it was a neighbor who saved me. My family only cared about appearances and reputation. The room grew still. A woman sitting near me whispered, I was the same. When I lost my husband, my relatives only asked about the insurance money. Linda nodded, her voice gentle as a breeze. We're all here because we've been abandoned in some way. But from pain we can turn it into strength to lift one another. Hearing those words, my heart stirred. For the first time I saw my pain not as a burden but as a source of strength. After the meeting, Linda approached me with a paper in hand. We need someone who can communicate and organize to help other widows find their voices. Patricia mentioned you worked in marketing. Would you like to try? Since Michael's death, I had never thought about work. But the idea of using my skills to help others like me lit something inside. I'll try. In the weeks that followed, I began assisting the organization. I designed flyers, built a new website, and helped plan fundraising events. Each day, I met women who had suffered like me, listening to their stories, finding ways to rise together. Once I met Anna, a woman a little younger than me, widowed by a car crash, left with 2 small children. She sat crying, clutching a hospital bill. I took her hand. I once thought I couldn't survive after Michael's death. But today I'm here talking to you. And I believe one day you'll sit in this seat lifting someone else. Anna looked up, tears brimming but with a flicker of hope. I realized that through my own story I was giving light to someone else. Meanwhile, my old house was being repaired day by day. They sent me photos. Moldy walls replaced, pipes reinforced, heating systems safely installed. With each picture I felt a piece of myself being restored too. One evening, Diane came by, bringing a knitted scarf she had made. You'll need this for winter. And remember, we don't always have to endure everything alone. I wrapped the scarf around my neck, warmth spreading through me. I whispered, you know, maybe this is the first time I truly feel like I have a family. I clutched the scarf tightly, murmuring in my heart, Michael, do you see? I'm learning to stand again. And I'll turn this pain into strength, not only for me but for so many others. The day I returned to my home after months in community housing, I waited quietly before the freshly painted wooden door. The house looked both familiar and strange, like a person reborn after illness. The old cracks were gone, replaced with bright white paint, reinforced walls. A new heating system hummed warmly as I stepped inside. I could hear its steady rhythm like a heartbeat. I walked the hallway, my steps trembling. The smell of fresh paint mixed with wood filled me with lightness. The living room was bright, windows replaced, spring sunlight pouring in. The basement was no longer a cold pool of water but dry, solid concrete. The kitchen now had a new filtration system, clean and safe. But what moved me most was the backyard. The crew, with a few neighborhood volunteers, had rebuilt the garden beds, planting roses and tulips Michael once dreamed of. In the center stood a small wooden bench with a plaque engraved, "In loving memory of Michael Henderson." I eased onto the bench, my hand unsteady as it followed the carving. Spring air carried the scent of flowers like his whisper. Diane stepped out from the kitchen carrying a pot of tea. Do you like it, Sienna? We thought we'd keep a little corner for Michael. We figured maybe that's what he would have wanted. You don't know, that was his dream. He always said one day we'd plant a garden so our children could play among the flowers. Diane smiled, setting the pot down on the wooden table. Well, now the garden still blooms. And you don't have to care for it alone. I'll be with you. As the house was reborn, I wanted my life to have a new beginning too. I thought often of Michael, of his work. He had been proud of being a builder but also worried about worker safety. He used to tell me about tragic accidents, families losing their providers in an instant. From those memories, I decided to establish the Michael Foundation. It would provide scholarships for children of construction workers who had died on the job, so they wouldn't have to abandon their dreams because of sudden loss. On the day of the foundation's launch, I stood at the podium in a small hall, my hand trembling as I held the microphone. Around me were familiar community faces. Patricia, Linda, the Widows Support Group, and Diane, sitting in the front row, her eyes full of encouragement. I began. Michael always believed the future would be built with knowledge and compassion. He once said the strongest structures weren't made of steel or concrete, but of people lifting each other up. Today, I want to turn his words into reality. When I handed the first scholarship to a 14-year-old boy, the son of a worker who died in an accident in Portland, I felt a sense of continuity. My pain had turned into strength to carry others. Day by day, my life grew steadier. I worked part-time for the nonprofit and I tended the backyard garden. Diane became an inseparable part of my life. She often came by in the afternoons with a basket of food or a packet of seeds. Once, as we planted lavender along the fence, Diane laughed. You know, Sienna, I used to fear I'd be lonely moving into this neighborhood. But now I feel like I've gained family. I looked up, my eyes stinging. Me too. You're like the sister, the mother, everything I never had in my own family. We kept planting quietly, the golden light of dusk covering the garden. In the evenings, Diane often stayed for dinner. I cooked simple meals, she brought dessert. We sat around the wooden kitchen table sharing everyday stories. One night, sipping tea, Diane placed her hand over mine. Sienna, you've come so far. From the pain of loss, from your family's neglect, you've created something good for many people. I believe Michael is proud of you. I nodded gently. I want to believe that too. He once told me to live, not just exist. Maybe now I'm finally beginning to understand what that means. The house was different, the garden was different, and I was different. But through all the change, one thing remained: Michael's memory and the love I was learning to share with the world. Each morning as I stepped into the garden, filling my lungs with the scent of new blossoms, I knew I was rebuilding life from the ruins themselves. And I often wondered, how many others out there have felt the same? Waiting for comfort from blood relatives, only to find love in complete strangers. Maybe that's life's paradox. Sometimes family isn't where you're born, but who chooses to stand by you when you're at your weakest. And what about you? Do you believe family can be redefined, not by blood but by presence and love? I truly want to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to join me in the journeys ahead.